He just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. He just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. Excellent, very nice. In 1753, young George Washington came to the Ohio. Just a year past 20, he had more than plenty of old get up and go. He didn't seem to mind the Indians or the ice and snow, as he just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. He just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. Lord Dinwiddie, the royal governor of Virginia, said, George, you'd better go west a month or so, see what the Frenchmen say. Just tell them that the king don't want 'em and they had better go. So George went a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. So George went a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. He met a trapper whose name was Christopher Gist, the histories say. And he looked mighty dapper in a coonskin capper, and he always knew the way. So George said, Christopher, let's get traveling, Erie's where we'll go. So they both went a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. They both went a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. Queen Aliquippa was an Indian skipper of a tribe down Logstown way. And George thought he'd better win this lady Indian and without delay. So he took her a coat and a jug of whiskey and stayed a day or so. Then he came back a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. He came back a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. George and Christopher kept on traveling clear to Fort LeBoeuf. George said, we'll state him an ultimatum, but the commandant called his bluff. When George said, gentlemen, beat toot sweet, the commandant said no. So they came back a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. They came back a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. Well, on the way back down, Christopher decided it would be a good idea to build a raft and float down the Allegheny River. Well, might have been a good idea, but poor George fell in the river. So in this verse, instead of walking and a-riding, he comes back swimming and coughing and sneezing, and I need one good sneeze, like this. Achoo! Okay? All right. They came back down to the wide Allegheny and built themselves a raft. But Christopher didn't get the gist of her, 'cause he thought the fore was aft. And George fell smack into the river while the wintry winds did blow. And he came back a-swimming and a-coughing and a-sneezing to the forks of the Ohio. So if you're ever out a-walking or a-riding on a Sunday afternoon, a stroll by the river is good for your liver, and you might sing this tune on the very same spot where George came traveling many years ago, as he just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio. He just came a-looking and a-walking and a-riding to the forks of the Ohio.
Well, Well, I think this would be a great time for some questions. Thank you so much, Paula. It is just fun to listen to these songs, and we want to thank our audience members who helped out and played some instruments and were just good sports all around. I've got Scotty Green with me, and Scotty is the executive director of DeBent's Antique Music World, where we are in Franklin. Scotty, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the history of this wonderful museum, and then you get to ask Paula the first question.
Oh, wow. We exist to entertain and educate the public, and we do that with a collection of music machines that are basically self-playing. So when you come here, you listen to the music as it was originally recorded on the machines. Of course, in order to do that, we have to maintain them too.
And that takes a lot of work and money, I would think.
Well, the money is a big help. We're a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, and we run the operation with about 42 of us are volunteers, and we have one part-time paid employee.
Wow. Very quickly, give us an idea of a couple of the more rare pieces that we might see when we come here.
Well, we have 3 pieces that don't exist anywhere else in the world. There's a band organ built by Wurlitzer in the late 1920s, an air calliope built by the Artisan Company in the mid-1920s, and a Berrywood AOW orchestrion that's the equivalent of a 12-piece band that was built in 1913.
Wow. Well, why don't you go ahead and ask Paula the first question?
Okay. We know that our stuff is authentic because the music was put in the machines when they were built. Where do you get your information that allows you to do authentic recreations?
Good question. And you shared a book with me a little bit earlier that's one of my favorite sources, the George Corson, Pennsylvania Songs and Legends. The nice thing about that book is that it actually has some of the music written out. So much of folk music is just passed down orally that it is hard to always know that you have the most authentic melody with your music. And of course, folk music historically has changed and evolved. It wasn't until recently, even after Stephen Foster's time, that we worried about copyrights. I mean, it was just perfectly natural to take a song you like, put new words to it, change it around a little bit, pass it on. So following that trail back is kind of tricky. But luckily in our region, we do have some historians that have collected field songs, field recordings, and people like Vivian Richmond, who was a wonderful recording artist in the 1940s that collected a lot of music and recorded it. So, you know, you kind of have to piece it together as best you can.
You've mentioned coal mine and railroad songs. Well, we all know I've been working on the railroad, but I've never heard of a coal mine song. Can you sing us one?
Oh, I can sing you a piece of one. I could sing you a little bit of the coal digging blues. In Western Pennsylvania, we're really lucky in our American heritage music because it has an African American influence in the coal mines, which isn't really the case in Eastern Pennsylvania. And I'll just sing you a little bit of this, but this is the coal digging blues. It goes, 15 years in a coal mine tain't a very long time. 15 years in a coal mine tain't a very long time. Some men pull a lifetime, some pull 99. 15 years in a coal mine tain't a very long time.
Well, that's very interesting. Did black people, black men especially, mine coal in Western Pennsylvania? I didn't know that.
In the bituminous coal fields, and especially after the end of the Civil War, when there was immigration northward, a lot of African American families came into our region and worked in the coal mines, and later in the steel mills.
I was just wondering whether there was any song that you were actually taught by an audience member at one time or another from their childhood.
Oh, that's interesting. I've made connections with people about songs. It's another coal mining song, actually. There's a little ditty, and this man came up afterwards and he said, "I bet you don't know this one." And it's, "My sweetheart's a mule in the mine. I drive her without any lines. On the bumper I sit and I chew and I spit all over my sweetheart's behind. And I said, yes, I actually do know that. And we sang it together.
Paula, I have a question. As I was listening to your presentation, I was really struck by the connection between past and present. And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, how music can help us make that connection.
I think music can do that better than anything else I can think of. There's something about singing a song that someone else sang long ago and far away that is a bridge between people. I mean, it's a visceral experience that connects you in a way that, you know, journals and diaries are wonderful. You can read them, you can kind of hear the voice in your head. But when you're singing the actual notes and putting the emotion in that someone else felt, there's a human connection there that I think is different than any other way to reach back and kind of touch another time.
Well, thank you, Paula, and what a rich musical history we have here in Pennsylvania. Paula's got much more to share with us, so what do you say we bring her back for more of Celebrating Pennsylvania in Story and Song? Here's Paula Purnell.
They say that early on, when the soldiers came through Western Pennsylvania, they were amazed at all the hard work that the women were doing. Not surprising, because women in Western Pennsylvania have always just risen to the call and gotten done whatever needed to do. But it was a lot of work. Can't even imagine, actually, clearing the land and growing your own food and making your own clothes. And a lot of this was women's work. So what I'd like to do in honor of that time and the women of Western Pennsylvania is a traditional ballad called Life is a Toil. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but certainly is an homage to women's work. Oh, before I should start, though, I should tell you a little bit about the instrument that I'm playing. Anybody familiar with this instrument? Dulcimer. There's one hanging upstairs. It's an Appalachian lap dulcimer. A lot of people associate this more with Southern Appalachian culture, but historians now have to agree that it was probably created right here in Western Pennsylvania. Some people say it was the Scottish and the Irish who missed the sound of their bagpipes. See if you think this sounds bagpipey at all. Not really. Maybe if you hadn't heard them for a long time. Maybe. Other people say it was the Germans who have an instrument a lot like this called a Scheinholt back home. But I think the wonderful thing about the culture and heritage in Central Appalachia where we are is that people brought all their traditions and customs and songs and heritage, and it all blended into something very unique, which is our Appalachian culture here. So this is Life is a Toil. One day I was walking, I heard a complaining, saw an old woman, the picture of gloom. She gazed at the mud on her doorstep, 'twas raining. This was her song as she wielded her broom. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double. Nothing is as I would wish it to be. There's too much of worriment goes in a bonnet. Too much of ironing that goes in a shirt. There's nothing to show for the time you'll waste on it. Nothing that lasts but for trouble and dirt. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double. Nothing is as I would wish it to be.